Hello everybody, my name is G.O.A.T Pendant. I'm a sculptor. I have been sculpting for 5 years. This is my latest creation, Yogi the Elephant. It's a jewelry line. He comes in gold, silver, and rose gold. I have also created him all the way up to 10-foot monumental sculptures. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to create the greatest of all time. In this case, this is a brush, but I created it for a pendant, which will be available in gold and silver. Enjoy the video. Okay, so I decided to do the greatest of all times G.O.A.T brush or a gold silver pendant. Materials needed today are air dry clay, a knife, some plastic for the surface, and here we go, we cut the first piece. Don't forget your creativity, most important tool in art. And you cut off a little piece of the clay, and here we go, we're gonna start drawing the outline just as if you were drawing the subject on a piece of paper. This is the way I sculpt. Some sculptors sculpt different, but when I do little pieces, this is how I do it. And you can see here I just finished doing the neck. Here we go, creating a little goatee, and that's pretty much the first step. Second step is cut out whatever is outside of the line that you have drawn. I am a freestyle artist, so I don't really play by rules. I like to have an image, but most of the time the image changes a lot. As you can see, this product compared to the end product, already you can see big changes. Here I am sculpting and adding a bit of the horns. Next step is to sand it. I usually start with 100 grit sandpaper and I work it up to 200, sometimes 220. The following step is to create a mold. I'm currently out of the country traveling. I don't have access to proper silicone molds, so I went to the local plumbing shop and I got myself a $5 Plumber Silicone. So all you need is some water, dishwashing soap. You put the dishwashing soap inside the water. Next thing is to add some of the silicone while your sculpture is waiting to be sculpted. Now here we go. Don't use gloves as the silicone will stick to it and you're gonna have a mess. The silicone has a pretty strong smell, so if you're not used to strong smells, I recommend using a mask. Basically squish it until it's all together and it's pretty much ready to go. In this case, this is the first time that I have ever used this type of molding process, so it's not going to be pretty, but you're gonna see it works. It's super cost efficient. You don't have to spend 30 bucks on a kit for molding, and it works in this case very well, depending on what type of sculpture you're going to mold. Okay, so I ended up not putting enough silicone in the water, so I added some more, and here I go again, smushing the silicone so it can be nice and firm, but not too firm. The silicone is a total mess, so I recommend having a dry towel and trying to clean your hands right away, because it can get very, very messy. And as you can see, I placed the silicone on the surface and I pressed the sculpture into a mold. I didn't know what to expect. Like I mentioned, this is the first time that I did it. So one thing that I've noticed here is the silicone didn't come up in between the horns, so I had to take care of that part myself. The main goal here is to basically build a little wall slash border around the sculpture, so when we take it out and we use the liquid for creating a copy of it, it won't spill out, and obviously it needs to take shape of the sculpture. I still didn't have enough silicone, so I decided to cut some off on the sides itself and to add a bit where it needed, which is the horns. Silicone takes usually a few hours to dry if you want to leave it in the sun. I'm an artist that's super messy and I have zero patience, so I took it out in the sun and 2 hours later it was pretty much ready to go. Again, it has a really bad smell, so if you don't like strong smells, please use a mask. Now I'm just fine tuning it, trying to make this super ugly piece of mold as beautiful as possible. But mainly what I'm doing is pushing the outside of the silicone onto the sculpture. It already actually started hardening, so it does this thing very fast. So there it is. Finished, done. Here we go. The next step, I took out the original piece out of the mold, and now I am mixing the material that's needed for our first piece. I don't use measuring cups because of my experience with this material, but it's 50-50. You mix it. So it's the hardener and then basically the resin. So this material is like super hard plastic. I like it. It's not expensive, but it does this trick. In this case, I'm gonna be working on a brush with Swarovski crystals. So there it is. I fill it up. You fill up the mold. This material only takes 15 minutes to harden. So it happens very, very fast. It is clear. And as it turns white, that means that is hardening. It gets very hot, so don't you dare touching it with your hands as it is drying, because the hardener and the resin fusion, when mixed together, the way the resin hardens is by heat. I had a little bit of extra, so I used some of the prior molds that I had, in this case a heart. So I didn't have to throw the rest of the material away, because once you mix it, it's over. You can't reuse it. Okay, here it is. I'm taking out our first piece. I'll recommend making 2 pieces because the first one usually breaks and you don't want to lose your hard work. It took me probably 3 to 4 hours to sculpt the original first piece. There's a lot of work involved in creating these pieces, even though it looks super easy. Okay, so here is a perfect example of not having patience and not playing by the rules. The silicone wasn't dry enough and it's pretty much glued to the piece, but I'm happy with it. It came out great. As you can see, it has some residue, which is normal when making a copy. Every single piece that comes out of the mold usually needs to be touched up. In this case, I am sanding around it. The rough pieces you can use, I don't know, maybe grit 120, 150, 160 sandpaper in the beginning, depending what you're gonna do with it. If you're gonna paint over it with acrylic or any other paints, I highly recommend using a bigger number, maybe like 200, 250, 300 is very, very smooth. I think 200 is more than enough, especially if you use an acrylic, because acrylic has plastic in the paint itself. But if you're doing what I'm doing, which is putting crystals over it, all the details will disappear and does not have to be as detailing. So that was the sanding process. Now I'm going to even out the surface of it. So you put a sheet of sandpaper on your surface and you just do what I'm doing. Now it's pretty much ready to go. So we are basically ready for our next step. Next step is painting. I'm painting it green because the color of choice that I chose today is avocado green. The reason why I'm painting the surface green is because when you use the crystals and you put them next to each other, there will be space in between. Even if you use the smallest ones, which I'm using one of the smallest ones that exist, there still will be white in between, because the surface is white and you don't want to have, you want to make it as beautiful as possible. You don't want to have white in between your avocado crystals, which is the next step. I would probably recommend 3 layers of paint. So here we go. This is the crystals. I call them Swarovskis. They are not official Swarovski brand, but they are glass rhinestones, glass crystals that you can get super cheap on websites like Amazon. This is the 006 SS 006 size. It usually comes with the glue, which is the 6000. You probably have about 2 to 5 minutes, depending on the weather, depending on the temperature inside the place that you're working in. You have about 5 minutes to work with this type of glue. The pencil itself also comes with it. it looks like it has glue on it because it's picking up the crystals very easy, but it does not. I recommend sharpening it to keep it sharp, especially if you are using small crystals. When you pick them up, you want the pencil to be sharp. If it's dull and you're using small crystals, it's going to be much more difficult, especially if you want to get in between difficult areas. My example is getting in between the horns. I usually sharpen the pencil as much as possible, and I go in between the horns and I pick up the crystal sideways, and then you can insert it sideways because sometimes the pencil won't fit. I also like to start on the outside of the sculpture. As you can see, I'm doing the first line on top and then I work my way down. Also trying to find the spot that you leave open where you can hold the sculpture until the end. Usually in this case, as you can see, I'm holding it by its goatee. Sometimes I used one of the horns as well. Once you get to the end of it and you can no longer hold it, you obviously have to wait for it to dry, and then you can go back to work. Here you can see I have about 5 layers of the crystals laid out. Unfortunately, the crystals make the sculpture lose its details, such as in this case the eye is popped out on the sculpture. You can't really see it, so in the next clip you will see what I'm doing to make that visible. So you basically pick a tiny little surface, put the glue on and go. I also would recommend for people that don't have experience working with art, this is very detailing work, so I would lay, in this case you can see that I have the pendant in my left hand, so I would lay my hand on the table so it's not shaking because the crystals are very, very tiny. Okay, so pretty much the first job of the crystals layout is done. I wasn't happy with the outcome because the eye, as I said, pretty much has disappeared, so I decided to use a second color, and I am using color blue. You can see that the crystals are falling off, and this is a perfect example. I left it purposely so you can see it. This is a perfect example of what happens when you get some of the glue on the pencil itself. Then the pencil no longer stays sticky. So what you do is you have to wipe it off. You can clean it off with your hand or maybe a towel. I usually have a wet towel next to me that I use for little accidents like that. And here you go. Here we see. Here you can see that I am adding maybe about 10 little blue crystals for the eye. And now you can see the eye better, which I was happy with. Sometimes you, especially in the beginning until you become a professional, it's difficult to put the crystals very close to each other, so it's this space in between. If there's a lot of space, you can just always go back and add another crystal. Even if it's not next to each other, it can be on top of each other. I, for instance, love this. I love how the eye popped out. And then I wanted to add a third color, which is aqua blue for the goatee. I thought about doing the same thing to the horns, but I didn't feel like it. I was happy enough with the outcome. And this is the way it looks. So here I am laying the last pieces of the goatee, and like I said, in this case I'm using this to make a brush. The greatest of all time G.O.A.T brush. I will be sending a copy to my jeweler so I can create this in gold and silver to add to my jewelry line collection. Okay, here we go. Last pieces are being added. I sped up the entire workflow just in case you get bored and not want to stick around for the entire video. Okay, so here I am. The last step is to paint the back of it, which I did green as well. And now I'm adding a pin, which will be for the brush. Maybe I would say let it sit for like an hour so it can be nice and strong and you can use it. So here's the finished piece. Beautiful. And here's the finished piece on a model. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. I will be making a lot of these videos. of little tiny beautiful cute sculptures that I'm creating for my jewelry line. Thank you, have a blessed day, bye bye.